develops from the same vesicular structure as the pons does, and the cerebellum attaches to the pons, so via the peduncles. So we'll look at the hemispheric structure, if we want to call it that, with the cerebellum. We'll look at a little bit of the blood supply, as if we haven't already done that. We're going to look at the flow of information and the inputs and the outputs. The deep cerebellar nuclei get, I don't want to say confusing, but how information flows through them and leaves the cerebellum is interesting. And how all of the cells synapse within the cerebellum and how information moves. The majority of what happens with cerebellar information is repression. There is a tremendous amount of inhibitory signaling going on in the cerebellum. And it's a little confusing when you first look at it, but once you understand, once you have a good grasp on the information flow and where inhibition takes place, it starts to make sense. When we look at the structure of the cerebellum, it is kind of a pretty part of the brain. You know, we've got the arbor vitae in here, and we've got all of the folia sitting out there. Literally, folia is a page, which represents, quote, tree foliage. So you should be able to remember all of the terms within here. The blood supply are those superior and inferior cerebellar arteries. I guess other people don't use the whole screen. But yeah, so when we look at this, and we're going to touch base a little bit right here on the territories of the cerebellum. So we can, as with other structures we've looked at in the last, I don't know, 10 weeks or so, you see that we have clearly defined regions that we can say, okay, we knock out the posterior inferior cerebellar artery. What do we lose? What do we lose with the anterior inferior? What do we lose with the superior? So this should make a lot of sense. Anatomically, we have a whole new anatomical name in here. I love this. I learned these differently. But this whole new anatomical structure is part. I don't know what a part is, anatomically speaking. We have the lateral part and the intermediate part, sure. Don't worry about that. The fissure in here, this fissure is important. It separates the superior and the inferior portions in here. We're going to talk about the vermis over the next little bit, and the folia. The folia, in many respects, are the folds. They are just the means of increasing increasing surface area within here. When this lateral part, if we think about it as a lateral hemisphere, as the intermediate hemisphere in here, we have some clear-cut distribution of function. Motor planning for the extremities involved with the lateral cortical spinal tract. Okay, so motor planning. This allows you to kind of figure out where your extremities are going to go. And once again, you go, you know, that's not that hard. I put my hand over here. You're going to all have patients in the future that lose that ability. that have had some sort of injury that they can't figure out how to go from here to there with their hand or their arm, or learning how to walk again. You go, well, you put this foot and then the next foot, and it's that ability to plan that out has been lost. Distal limb coordination. Well, distal. What are your distal limbs? Okay? Distal limb from here on out. Yeah. Okay? That is truly as distal as it gets. But what we see, and we're gonna look at the homunculus for this, is that the distal limbs are basically your forearm, wrist, and hand, your calf, and ankles, involving the lateral coracospinal tract and the rubrispinal tract. And then we get into the vermis and the flocculonodular lobe. Well, we see the vermis here. We'll take a look at the floccular area and then the nodus in a little bit. Balance, vestibulo-ocular reflexes. Balance is going to become very important here. This is where the cerebellum is going to interact with the vestibular nuclei. That's going to become very, very important. And the vestibulo-ocular reflexes. What you have to think about, and we touched on this when we talked about vision, is that your center of balance can contribute to your becoming dizzy, and you're losing the ability to actually focus and hold focus on things so that you're becoming dizzy. So there's a lot going on. But you should know the basic breakdown for these three areas. So this, quote, lateral part out here is more hemispheric. This intermediate part is also hemispheric. So, and then the vermis and flocculonodular lobe, which we'll look at again in a little bit. An important part of what is going to happen here is going to involve the peduncles. We have the middle peduncle, the superior peduncle, and the inferior peduncle. Note that the middle peduncle is lateral and the other two are medial. Whatever it takes to remember the organization. The superior actually is slightly superior. The inferior is actually slightly inferior. These connect the cerebellum to the pons. Here they are, in here we've cut away the cerebellum. In here we have the cerebellum that has been cut away. So here are our three peduncles. Okay, superior peduncle. Outputs from the cerebellum. So signals leaving the cerebellum go through the superior peduncle. The other two, the middle and the inferior, have inputs coming to the cerebellum. Now, as we look at this in here, we can see the flocculus sitting over here, the nodulus over here, the vermis over there. This becomes really disorienting when most textbooks want to call this and this a lobe. It's very, very disorienting to students. They're not connected. They're sitting, you got one piece over here, piece over there, piece over there, and this is all part of the flocculonodular lobe. Functionally, it's more important than anatomically. All right? Well, the information flow here is going to become really strange and bizarre. Because just a second ago I said the majority of what goes on